In this section, we will discuss English settlement in America, specifically the first permanent English settlement at Jamestown. Our essential question is, what challenges did England face in settling Jamestown? So first, let's cover some more reasons for English colonization, things that were happening over in England that pushed people to the New World. One of the first contributing factors was population growth. There were better diets throughout England due to the Columbian Exchange. People were living longer, they were healthier, therefore they were producing more offspring, and the population of England was exploding. England is a small little island, so there was little room for this new population to go. And especially for England's poor, there were very few chances to move up through society. Many of these people moved to the cities looking for work, which they couldn't find. Also in the rural areas of England, there was a new policy of enclosure where they began fencing in land for farming. Typically in England, all of the poor farmers in rural areas had shared land, and that's how they made their livelihood. Enclosure meant that there was no land left for the poor. So like I said, many of them moved to the cities. Unfortunately, this led to increased unemployment. So the leaders of England got on board with colonizing the New World in order to send some of these unemployed people that they saw as drains on society to the New World to work, to get them out of England. There was also the tradition of primogeniture. This means that the firstborn inherits all of the father's land. So even within a wealthy family, if you were a second or third-born son, you had no land or fortune to look forward to. So many of these, like Sir Walter Raleigh, were willing to head off to the New World to find their own land and fortunes. The first attempt at settlement in the New World by the English was off the coast of North Carolina, on an island called Roanoke. In 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh had led an expedition there, but it hadn't stayed very long. In 1587, a group of 100 colonists, with an expedition funded by Sir Walter Raleigh, heads back to the Carolina coast with hopes of setting up a permanent settlement. This group of colonists was led by Governor John White. This was mostly families, including John White's daughter, who was pregnant on the voyage over and gave birth to the first English baby born in the New World, Virginia Dare. Governor John White was soon forced to sail back to England to get more provisions and supplies. But once he arrived over in England, he was told he would not be given a ship to sail back because England was now at war with Spain. So he is stuck over in England for 3 years while this group of colonists is left over in the New World to fend for themselves. By the time he is able to get back to North Carolina, the settlement had disappeared and we have never discovered what happened to them. There are many theories that maybe they left and joined a neighboring Native American tribe, or else they were killed and slaughtered by a Native American tribe. Maybe, they were running out of provisions on the coast and decided to move inland to try and settle somewhere else where they had more access to food. We don't know, and we'll likely never know what happened to the lost colony. The only clue that they left behind in their abandoned settlement was the word Croatoan carved in a tree, that we're not sure whether that refers to a Native American tribe nearby or possibly a location. We still have not been able to discover what they were trying to tell us with that clue. The Virginia Company was a company with intentions to make money. The Virginia Company received a charter to settle in the New World from King James I, and it was the Virginia Company that established the settlement of Jamestown. The Virginia Company was a joint stock company, which meant that many people invested in the company by buying shares with the goal of earning a larger profit. So, like a modern day corporation where you buy stocks in the stock market with hopes of getting a larger return. So, whenever the Virginia Company sent its first settlement over to the New World, their number one goal is to make money for the investors of the Virginia Company. That meant whenever the first settlement arrived in Jamestown in 1607, that their main goal was to look for gold, something that they didn't find a lot of in Virginia. So Jamestown becomes the first permanent English settlement in the New World, obviously located off the coast of Virginia. The first settlement was made up of 144 Englishmen and boys, and it almost did not survive. After the first year, only 38 of the original settlers were left alive. This was because in their fruitless effort to search for gold, the men did not spend the time that they needed to farm and grow food or to build adequate shelter, and therefore were exposed to harsh conditions. Some of the challenges that they faced at Jamestown was disease, especially malaria, which is carried by mosquitoes, was extremely detrimental to the Jamestown settlers. They also faced famine, aka starvation, because everyone, once again, was concerned with finding gold instead of planting food. They also faced Indian attacks from local Native Americans, as well as brutal winters. After the first year of settlement, when Jamestown almost did not survive, Captain John Smith took control over Jamestown and whipped the colonists into shape. He implemented his no work, no food policy, in which he mandated that every man in Jamestown had to farm for 4 hours each day. If you don't farm, then you don't get to eat. Under his leadership, Jamestown started doing much better. He sent out men to explore the area, made maps of the local landmarks and the people around them, and he also established good relations with the local Indians. At one point, he was captured by the Powhatan tribe, and he was, according to popular history, saved by Pocahontas right before he was about to be beheaded by the chief. We can see that scene happening here. However, most historians don't buy into the fact that John Smith was about to be killed. They believe that it was an elaborate plan in order to establish good relations between the groups. If you've seen the Disney movie Pocahontas, you may believe that Pocahontas went on to marry John Smith after she saved him, but that did not happen. She did marry a different John, who we'll talk about later. Unfortunately for Jamestown, John Smith suffered a bad injury due to a gunpowder explosion, and he was forced to go back to England for medical care. Most of the men who came to Jamestown were gentlemen. They were the elites of society. They were not expected to work. They lived on family money. So once they got to Jamestown, they were not willing to put in the work necessary to make a colony work. They brought only their best clothes that were not suited for farming. And these were the men who had to be whipped into shape by John Smith and told, you have to face the hardships that go along with settling this colony. Once John Smith is gone, Jamestown starts to decline again. The roughest period of early Jamestown history was the winter of 1609 to 1610, which is called the Starving Time. There was rampant disease and hunger throughout the Jamestown settlement. People were starving. They were eating whatever they could to survive. That meant, their leather shoes, their horses, any plants that they could find. Some colonists got so desperate that they raided the stores for of food that was set aside for all of Jamestown. They were publicly executed for stealing that. One colonist even resorted to cannibalism and cannibalized his own wife. He was also executed for that crime. At the end of the starving time, only about 100 colonists out of the 500 at that time survived. That is an 80% death rate at the end of the starving time. The discovery that will ensure the survival of Jamestown is tobacco. Like I said, they didn't have much luck finding gold, but they were able to start becoming profitable off of tobacco. The man who brought the tobacco crop that would help Jamestown survive was John Rolfe. John Rolfe had acquired seeds of Spanish tobacco that was very pleasant and smooth, and people in England went crazy for it. So Jamestown began planting this tobacco wherever they could. Their streets were lined with tobacco in hopes of raising enough money to make Jamestown profitable. However, though the money that Jamestown made off of tobacco was pretty vast, it was not enough to cover the cost of settlements. So by 1924, the Virginia Company is declared bankrupt by the king, and Virginia becomes a royal colony under direct control of the monarch of England. After Rolfe brings tobacco to Jamestown, him and Pocahontas marry to bring peace between the settlers of Jamestown and the Powhatan Indians. Pocahontas was the daughter of the Powhatan chief. However, this peace will not be long lasting. Unfortunately for Pocahontas and for her people, she was taken over to England after their marriage, where she contracted smallpox and died at the young age of 21. Her father died not long after, and they say that it was due to heartbreak over losing his beloved daughter Pocahontas. 8 years after the marriage of Pocahontas and Rolfe, the Powhatan Indians will attack Jamestown, killing 347 settlers, including John Rolfe. This is considered the start of the Second War between the settlers of Jamestown and the surrounding Powhatan Indians, which the Native Americans lost, which resulted in them being removed from their land. In the first 60 years of settlement of Jamestown, 90% of the Native American population was wiped out from both disease and warfare. So the arrival of English settlers in Jamestown resulted in decimation of the local Native American tribes. Once Jamestown settlers had figured out how to grow their own food and were doing better, they had no use for their previous Indian allies and therefore were willing to wage war with them. Tobacco was the way that Jamestown made money. However, that is a lot of work. So in Jamestown, we see the start of 3 forms of labor that will persist throughout the southern colonies during the colonial years. The most popular method in Jamestown was indentured servitude. So in exchange for free passage to the New World, settlers from England were brought over and they worked from 4 to 7 years, basically in a condition of slavery. However, with the important difference of having their freedom at the end of those 7 years. However, because of the harsh condition in Jamestown, we saw that 80% death rate. Many of the indentured servants did not survive their period of service. The headright system was also created, which promised 50 acres of land to plantation owners for every person they paid to come to the New World. So if you were able to fund the passage of, 10 new settlers to Jamestown, you would be rewarded 500 acres of land. And then we also saw the introduction of African slaves in 1619. That is when the first slaves of African descent arrived at Jamestown, creating the system of slavery that would persist throughout the South until the Civil War. The colonists in Jamestown began to rule themselves locally. By 1619, we see the creation of the Virginia House of Burgesses in the Jamestown settlement. And this is significant because it was the first lawmaking representative assembly in America. This means that people voted for their elected officials who then gathered to make laws for the welfare of the people they served. Um, this was a step in democracy. The only people who were eligible to vote were white land-owning males. The Virginia House of Burgesses was modeled after the English Parliament. So these Englishmen brought the traditions that they were used to and then used that to rule themselves. At first, the king over in England was not happy with the Virginia House of Burgesses. He wanted to be the sole source of power. However, the Virginia House of Burgesses continued meeting at least once yearly to create these laws to govern Jamestown. A little bit later, after Jamestown has spread into more inland lands, we see Bacon's Rebellion. Colonists had moved westward, which had caused more clashes with Native Americans. The farmers who moved out west were often attacked by Native Americans, and they wanted protection from their government. However, the government on the East Coast had a very lucrative fur trading business with the Native Americans and wanted to keep those good relations. So they refused to provide the protection from the Native Americans that the farmers in the West asked for. So Governor Berkeley did not meet the demands of the farmers in the western parts of Virginia. These farmers started an uprising under the leadership of Nathaniel Bacon. Nathaniel Bacon was not a poor farmer, as you can see. Though he lived on the frontier, he was an aristocrat that was actually related to Governor Berkeley. However, he gathers an army of indentured servants, and they launch an attack on Jamestown in 1676. They are able to take control of Jamestown for a short amount of time, but then Bacon dies and the rebellion collapses. The effects of Bacon's Rebellion is that Jamestown was burned down and had to be rebuilt. The House of Burgesses then opened more land in the frontier to settlers. They met the demands of those frontier settlers. And the most important effect was that colonists began to rely more on slave labor than indentured servants because they feared this uprising. Slaves that were coming over from Africa often did not speak the same language. It would have been hard for them to organize. And of course, they could be more brutal and oppressive to these slaves than they could to indentured servants. So Bacon's Rebellion is partially responsible for the growth of the slave economy throughout Virginia.